Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Madison, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about possibly doing a video podcast alongside my audio podcast. So I have come up with a list of pros and cons of why I think this would be beneficial for me and reasons why I think it might not be as lucrative or as efficient as just recording a podcast with a microphone, no video. So let's just jump right into the pros list. So jumping into number 1 on this list, it would add another stream for an audience to find me. In a perfect world where making a podcast is my job, it would add just another possibility for another stream of income. So that is something that I'm thinking about down the line. If that is something that ends up happening, it would be nice to have that already set in place and just already have that going, so that let's say I record 20 episodes and maybe like 10 people listen to those episodes, but then suddenly something happens and a bunch of people are listening to my episodes and they find my podcast. Those videos are already there for them to watch, to listen, to have playing in the background. Or there's also just my regular podcast feed on Spotify or Stitcher that they can listen through those as well. So I'm trying to think of more in the future and try to start myself off with a solid base so that I have all these different things in play for the possibility that this might actually take off and be something that is profitable and something that I can live off of. I want to think more realistically that I know this is something that probably wouldn't happen for quite some time, or it might be something that happens sooner than I expect. But to have that opportunity to already have that in place and not decide to do it down the line after I've already made 20 podcasts, instead of just having a video podcast from the start so that it's part of my brand, I guess you could say, it is something that is intriguing to me, or just something that I've been thinking about as I myself have watched video podcasts and I enjoy them. It feels a little bit more personal than just listening, even though I still listen to podcasts all the time. It is a different experience listening to a podcast versus watching a podcast, even though technically it's not a podcast. It's a whole different video. All right, so moving on to reason 2. To me, it feels as if that history is a niche that does not seem to be as oversaturated on YouTube, or it just doesn't have as much of a presence, at least in what YouTube shows me. I've done some searches, I've done some looking around, and I find a couple of history podcasts. So if I search history podcasts into the YouTube search bar, it shows me a couple of actual history podcasts, but then a few down, it's a Kendall Ray podcast or video about a murder. And then if I scroll down more, it's Joe Rogan, and I wouldn't really consider that a history podcast. So it seems as if their search for history podcasts is just maybe not up to par with actually being a history podcast, or it's not as searchable as maybe possibly someone is putting up a history podcast, but they're not labeling it history podcast in their title or in their description, so it's a little harder for it to be found within the search. I just think there is a lot of opportunity there for me personally to grow, and it just doesn't seem like a sector of YouTube that I have found to be overly saturated. It could just be what YouTube exposes me to. I know there's hundreds of millions of videos that I will never see just because of how I watch YouTube and how YouTube suggests videos to me. The third and final pro on my list is that with the video podcast, I could eventually make that into segments instead of like an hour-long podcast. Separate like a group of information that's a cohesive story or tidbit of information or little timeline, and have that as a separate short or segment or clip, and have that as a shorter, and have that small piece of the podcast available on its own, so that if people are, say, looking for once, and have that information separate or separated, so that let's say I did a whole hour-long episode on the Radium Girls, but you are looking for one specific Radium Girl, and I happen to talk extensively about just her, I could separate that into its own clip and then have that be searchable on its own, so that I might not get a whole hours long of watch time, but I would still get a view, and I would still get someone listening to the segment about Grace Fryer. Like, that would be someone who was able to find my podcast through a different way of searching and through a different way of presentation. My main reason for wanting to do this would be to diversify my audience, because I know there's people out there who don't like to listen to hour-long podcasts or longer. They like to listen to short podcasts or short little segments. But with what I want to do, I'm expecting episodes to probably be about 45 minutes to an hour. But if I'm able to offer somebody something that's in a shorter segment, like 5 to 10 minutes, then that would just be another way that I'm able to get someone to come to my podcast and listen. And maybe they'll like that and they'll want to listen to a whole episode. So I'm just trying to make it so that I have multiple ways for people to find me and for people to want to listen to my podcast in whatever format they choose. Segment, long form video, or just regular classic podcast. Now moving on to the cons. So the number one con that I have is that I would have to look presentable for every time I would record a podcast, which is not the biggest thing in the world. It's not the end of the world, but it is something that you don't really have to do if you're just doing an audio podcast. You don't have to do your hair. You don't have to wear a nice shirt. You could roll out of bed in your pajamas and just set up at your desk and start recording. There's no prep. But I mean, you could look however you wanted when you record a podcast and it wouldn't really matter. Not that it 100% matters what you look like on camera. I do feel like that people would more rather watch a video where someone looks a little bit more presentable than if I just rolled out of bed with bed head and my pajamas. The second con is that I would have to have a sort of like a set. I'd have to have a nice background that would be appealing to most people. So I already am thinking about a possible future set, and I kind of already have things going in motion. This bookshelf that's behind me, I'm planning on moving it to the other side where my previous videos have been filmed with me sitting at my desk. I have another bookshelf that's exactly like the one that's behind me. Not as full, but I would be able to move the books around and make it so that the part that is being recorded would be the part that is full of books. This one is a little bit overflowing, but I could make it look a little fuller for both of them. They're both 6 shelves. My other bookshelf is 2 shelves full, but I kind of have books that are hanging out all over the place that would just fit right in. So the third con on my list would be that I would most likely have to purchase an actual camera. Right now I'm recording on my cell phone. I'm sure it might be a little obvious. The video quality is not that great, but it is better than no video quality at all. But if I was going to be doing this for a podcast, not that I don't want these videos to be the best video I've ever recorded or the best quality, but I feel like the standard is probably a little higher for a video podcast. It just feels like something that would need a higher quality video. And I mean, I would most likely use it for this as well. This channel would greatly appreciate a camera upgrade. My iPhone 8 camera is doing its best, but it is definitely not the best camera in the world. So that is also something I would have to consider. Along the lines of purchasing a new camera, I would also probably have to purchase items for the set that I would have to make. So like a chair and then like a table of some sorts to prop my microphone on. Again, I don't record with a microphone for these videos. It is just my phone and the audio that comes from my phone. So not the best, not the worst, but it could be better. So it would just change, I think, my whole dynamic of how I record these videos and how I would record podcast videos. And I actually have a fourth con, and that would be time. It would take more time to record a podcast video than it would to record an audio only podcast. It's just a fact. But I think that it would be time well invested because I would be recording the video and I would also be recording the audio at the same time. The audio would be recorded nonetheless. But it is the extra matter of me having to get ready, having to have a set, having to make a way so that when I'm reading or talking about the topic at hand, I don't know, I don't want to say teleprompting to myself, but teleprompting to myself the words that I want to say, instead of just being able to sit in front of my microphone with my notes and just kind of going through them and reading them. But if I'm recording myself, I want to be a little bit more engaged with the camera so that the audience is more engaged with the video, and it'll be something that I'll test out. And I don't know if it is something that I will actually end up doing, but it is something that I have been thinking about for quite some time now, especially as I have found myself watching more and more podcasts on YouTube, especially while I'm home. If I'm driving, it's still just Spotify. But if I'm home, I will open up YouTube and find either a long form video, which I have found a lot of long form YouTube videos to be more podcast-like recently than they used to be. So it is something that is changing on the YouTube platform, and it is something that I think I want to act upon now while it is something that is happening. There is a change that is going on. I have recognized that this change is happening, and I think that it would be something that would be beneficial for me if I actually went forward with making a video podcast. And then, I mean, I would say one of the biggest proponents of this being a tangible business model would be YouTube is the world's second largest search engine. So why would I not want to put myself on a platform that acts as the second largest search engine? That is just another way for people to find me and another way for people to listen. I think I would be doing myself a disservice not to put up something on YouTube, even if it is just a static image with audio behind it, which some people do and some people actually listen to those. But I think that the future of podcasting and this type of media is going to be a crossover between the video and the audio and having both available for the consumer. So that is something that I have thought a lot about, especially my own listening habits and what I hear from my friends or other people that I know who listen to podcasts and what their preferences are, because everyone listens a different way. There is a possibility that I would miss out on a certain audience of people if I don't put out different streams of availability, of podcast availability. But it is not a set decision. I have not decided if I am going to be doing that. It is something I am still going to be percolating in the back of my mind as I go through the next couple of weeks of actually getting everything together. Once I have my logo, which is something I've been thinking about exactly what I want to go in there, and once I have what I want to be kind of like my music, my intro music, something that I want to be associated with my podcast and with me, with my what I hope to be my brand. Once I have all of those pieces, I think it will make a little bit more sense to me on what would be best for my future and the future of this podcast adventure that I'm going on. So that brings me to the end of this video. I am probably going to be putting out a video of this transition I'm going to be doing with moving my bookshelves to where my desk is and my desk to where my bookshelf is. My bookshelf is not alphabetized at the moment. That is how I prefer to put my books up, but I will probably also be making a video of me going through my books and alphabetizing, maybe a little segue here or there about books that I like, books that I really enjoyed when I was younger, middle school, high school. There's always a soft spot in my heart for these books that I've read my childhood and my young adulthood, and I like to treat them with respect, and I would like to have them where I want them on this shelf. Make sure that they're all in the correct order and make sure that author is with author. But those are all things to be looking forward to in the next couple of videos. But with that, I will see you in the next one. Bye!